Did you know that in South Africa and in Australia, a wine can be labeled with a single vintage or a single year as long as 85% of the wine is made up from fruit harvested in that year? Now, this little 15% loophole creates all sorts of opportunities for crazy shenanigans in the cellar. For example, a winemaker might want to bottle a really young, rugged, abrasive Shiraz and then blend in 15% of a far older Shiraz to attempt to combine the vibrance of youth, perhaps, with the refinement of age. But we can take it a step further, because it doesn't even have to be Shiraz. You could take a couple of 100 liters of really ripe Merlot that's been aged in a barrel for 3 years and blend that into some fresh Carignan. So long as the Carignan makes up at least 85%, you can still put both Carignan and the vintage on the label.
Is that really true, Lieutenant? That's true. It's not always.
It's not always true.
In California, at least under AVA laws, they get a little more sticky, because if you want to print the vintage on the label, you have to have at least 95% of the wine made with fruit harvested in that vintage. But if the winemaker decides not to export that wine, then all those laws go down the toilet, and he can add as much as 25% of a completely different cultivar to the wine and still label it as, for example, a Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. Of course, there are some more subtle and less nonsensical manipulations of these loopholes. For example, some winemakers take last year's old lees and add them into a freshly fermented batch of wine, and that does something amazing that I'm not sure I completely understand. But the reason that we are talking about wine laws at all is because today's hand drink solar wine of the day is a non-vintage red blend called Satelites, and it's made by winemaker Samantha Suddons as part of her VINE Venom wine range. Samantha Suddons is a fascinating human being. If you catch her at a wine festival on a weekend, she will no doubt be garbed from head to toe in maximum glam, complete with a flowing sundress, outsized designer sunnies, and most likely under a silk umbrella discussing art history, which is something she majored in at university. However, catch her 24 hours later on a Monday morning in the cellar, and she may well present as a crimson-stained, nerdy cellar rat with dirty hands and a mind full of ideas ranging from formation of flor through to the color extraction rates of Touriga National. And really, when you look at Samantha's range of wines, it couldn't more comprehensively express the two sides that she presents on any given day. Because the wine labels are beautiful abstract artworks by Cape Town artist Daniel Levi. This expresses Samantha's uncanny ability to discover artistic talent. But if you look at the wines inside the bottle, well, they couldn't possibly get any nerdier, therefore comprehensively expressing her full-on wine geek persona. The VINE Venom range includes a Cap Classique, a skin contact Chenin Blanc, a white wine aged under flor, and today's exceedingly unusual non-vintage lighter red blend. We've spoken before about how non-vintage wines are kind of like the manifestation of a Dr. Strange ethos when it comes to winemaking, where a winemaker will take time as an additional vector with which to craft the wine that he wants to make. Now, Samantha Suddons' winemaking approach and her use of non-vintage is probably less inspired by the multiverse and more inspired by pragmatism. In fact, she would say that she is simply following in the footsteps of some of the oldest and most famous champagne houses who've been making non-vintage wines for centuries, purely so that they can deliver a very distinct and replicable house style. Samantha has essentially set about to achieve the same goal and used non-vintage winemaking in order to be able to deliver a lighter red blend that has that VINE Venom style that can be repeated year after year. We've also discussed how there is this notion of a Swartland red blend, which is actually this globally unique concept that takes Rhone cultivars for the most part, but then blends them with Portuguese cultivars like Touriga National, how this doesn't really happen anywhere else in the world. Now, Samantha Suddons has done that with the Satelites red blend, but she's gone and added an additional element. When it comes to making the wine, there are two rough components. The first of which is a really early harvest mix of Touriga National and Cinsault. And these grapes are then whole bunch pressed, kind of like you'd whole bunch press Pinot Noir when making a champagne. And the way Samantha tells it, the Touriga National even if it has that super lightning fast press and has minimal contact time between the juice and the skins, it still delivers this insane hot neon pink wine because the color pigment in the Touriga is just so intense. And now that in itself is kind of cool. Then once she has a light aromatic rosé component, she adds in Syrah or Shiraz and Grenache, both of which have been fermented in a more conventional on the skins type way, but also which have been aged in oak for at least a year. So essentially what she's done is to take concentration and texture in one component, which is the Shiraz and the Grenache. She's allowed some of those rougher tannins to silken up over time, and then she's added that into a lighter rosé component that has all the aromas and natural acidity that you could hope for. When they're all together, in theory, there's high natural acidity, loads of aromas, texture, and concentration. But let's get into the glass to see if that's really what happens. So first off, when we get into the glass and give this guy a sniff, we do get a delightfully aromatic, expressive open nose that does seem to talk of the two components that go into this wine. The first notes that present themselves seem to come from the rosé component. And what we have is amazingly bright, generous pink musk sweets, some pomegranate, sweet strawberries, even perhaps a touch of rosewater or Turkish delight. But then, and especially as the wine warms in the glass, and I suggest you give it time to do so, you have these riper Grenache fruit notes that come through, cherry pop candy, some red plum elements, even blackberry fruit. But there's a third element to the aromas as well, which is a little mix of herbs and florals. We've talked about rosewater a little bit, but then there's a slightly fresher lavender element, possibly from the Shiraz, and along with that comes some white pepper, and there's a beautifully subtle but very present note of fennel, possibly from the Grenache. Now Samantha says that her favorite thing to do with this wine is to start with it chilled and let it slowly warm in the glass and just track the evolution as the various aromas take their turn to come to the fore. Essentially, she calls it two wines in one because it does present very differently when it's chilled to the way it does once it's had time to warm. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. But if you have any questions about Samantha Suddons or Vine Venom or Whole Bunch Pressing or the Swartland, then drop those comments onto the website and I will do my best to get back to you. And if you enjoyed the video, then consider supporting us on Patreon so that we can make more of these videos, and subscribe to the Hendrik Solar YouTube channel where we publish at least 6 videos each month talking about things like wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the dynamic winemaking stars like Samantha Suddons that are coming out of the South African wine.